and it landed. Some students came within just feet of it. It's so scary. It also left a burned area on the ground. Hello, everyone. Suzanne and John back again with another episode of God and the Paranormal, a podcast exploring high strangeness from a biblical worldview. Thanks for joining us. Last time, we examined the feasibility of intelligent, biological, extraterrestrial beings behind the UFO phenomena so many are observing. On this episode, we'll be diving back into the UFO discussion again, looking at some of the landmark events related to UFOs.
And what we'll try to do is refrain from analyzing right now and just take a more documentary approach. We've attempted to put together a representative sample of some of the more credible reports.
Yeah, I don't think that the average person realizes how many UFO reports there are made.
Yeah.
The military's Project Blue Book from 1947 to 1969 investigated 12,000 accounts.
Yeah, and it's difficult to do analyses on these reports. There are several military and private reporting centers, but from these, a conservative number of reports might be in the tens of thousands per year just in the U.S., and that would be hundreds of thousands since 1947, and probably well into the millions worldwide.
And that includes all countries, right?
Yeah, definitely not a uniquely U.S. cultural phenomenon. And in a very generalized view, here's how the data break down. And this is actually not counting those that are known to be hoaxes. So we've taken all of those out. So we've got 34% that are clearly explainable as just a mistaken identity. It's just something like, a weather balloon or something.
Very much like other paranormal and unusual events, about a third end up being just mistaken identities.
Yeah. And in episode 14, we saw how people often mistake things like meteors, planets, satellites.
Yeah, and the 61% not enough information portion, that doesn't mean that these are not credible accounts. They're simply like someone witnesses a phenomenon and that's it. It's just a dead-end investigation.
Yeah, kind of like a criminal cold case. The witness may be very credible and the event very real, but there's just no further leads to pursue. For example, I can think of one case that involved two seasoned police officers who were run off the road by a huge spherical orb one night.
Wow.
And both of them saw it and described it as not of this world, but there was just no dash cam video and no radar reports, no physical traces.
And then there's that very interesting 5%, the small number that seem to have good documentation, come from credible witnesses, and yet are still unexplainable. And 5% might sound trivial, but with the mountain of total reports, that's thousands of significant reports that have multiple witnesses or good corroborating data.
The ones that really bother the skeptics.
And the ones for which we keep saying they're seeing something. 100% of that many people can't be totally 100% wrong.
Now, we don't want to categorize this subject to death, but this might be a good time to mention J. Allen Hynek's popular rating scale for UFO encounters. Most people know this probably from the movie Close Encounters of the Third Kind.
Yes, according to Hynek, a close encounter of the first kind is defined as an observation of a UFO close enough to make out basic features, shape, windows, light, surface, etc. A close encounter of the second kind involves some interaction with the environment, such as a track, burn mark, radio static, or radar image. And a close encounter of the third kind is when an actual living entity is in some way associated with a UFO.
So let's do a little history here. As we mentioned, we've collected some representative cases from that 5% of reports, and only Hynek's first through third categories for right now. We'll save the stranger, alien encounters, and alleged abductions for a future episode.
And for now, we're simply giving the testimonies of the witnesses on a broad range of events.
Right. Just summarizing the types of UFO phenomena that have been observed by a wide range of experiencers. What are the raw descriptions witnesses are giving? We'll refer to these later when we start considering the realities behind the phenomenon and drawing some conclusions.
And in researching some of these accounts, there certainly is what we could call the modern era of UFO activity, beginning about 70 years ago. But it's surprising that unusual aerial events have been recorded throughout history. Here's one from 218 BC Italy, ships in the sky. During the buildup to the Second Punic War, Livy recorded what he called phantom ships had been seen gleaming in the sky. Wow.
And I think that's interesting that these ancient accounts often refer to them as ships or vehicles. Something led to the belief that these objects were transporting beings.
Yeah, that's fascinating because it really matters how you translate it.
Yeah.
Here's another from AD 65. Jewish historian Josephus reported a sky army of chariots hurtling through the clouds just prior to the First Jewish-Roman War. Wow.
Yeah, and that's Josephus.
Yeah,
So,
he's very credible.
So jumping forward in time, 1561, an atmospheric phenomena happened over Nuremberg. Residents described an aerial battle followed by the appearance of a large black triangular object, and it eventually crashed outside the city. Witnesses said it was accompanied by hundreds of spheres, or what we would call orbs, I guess, and cylinders and other odd-shaped objects that moved erratically overhead.
More recently, in the United States, 1896, mystery airships. Newspapers across California and later other states, especially the Midwest, printed reports of strange airships and flying lights. Common elements of the descriptions included bright lights, cigar-shaped bodies, movable wings, and a metallic hull.
And notice the description as airships or blimps. That was the type of aircraft that came to mind at that time, the only reference point they had, actually.
Yeah, and here's one from 1897 in Aurora, Texas. Local correspondent S.E. Hayden reported the crash of an airship piloted by an alien. According to Hayden, the odd-looking pilot was buried in a local cemetery. I haven't heard of that one.
Yeah, it knocked his windmill over and did all kinds of damage. It's been heavily researched. They can't find the body, though, unfortunately. So 1942, this is during World War II. It's been called the Battle of Los Angeles. Just months after the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor, U.S. radar stations picked up an unidentified aerial object. For several hours, anti-aircraft artillery fired thousands of rounds, and the L.A. Times reported that the air over Los Angeles erupted like a volcano.
Wow. Why hasn't everybody heard of these things?
It makes you wonder, doesn't it?
Only people who are into UFOs know these stories.
Yeah.
Well, let's move on into the modern UFO era. Most ufologists see the 1947 Kenneth Arnold sighting as the beginning point.
And you mentioned ufologist. That's the going term now for someone researching UFOs.
So we're kind of ufologists, I guess.
Yeah, I like that. John McWilliams, ufologist. Anyway, 1947, private pilot Kenneth Arnold was flying near Mount Rainier. As he was flying, he decided to look for a lost military plane that the government had asked people to look for as they were flying. As he was doing this, he flew a little bit off course. He reported seeing a group of metallic craft moving at high speeds and flashing in the sun like mirrors, is what he said. So Arnold summarized the sighting as 9 crescent-shaped metallic aircraft flying in formation. He estimated at about 1,200 miles per hour. So he was a pilot. He was used to seeing other planes and things flying around. But he said they had a skipping motion like a saucer skimming on water. And by the way, Arnold was widely accepted as credible, level-headed, and non-exaggerating. So when they reported on this in the newspaper, the reporter introduced the term flying saucers, and Arnold's sighting sparked an explosion of UFO reports around the country. Now, Interestingly, this was June 24th, 1947. There were many reports of UFOs across the U.S. in the following days. And a few days later, Roswell, New Mexico. Rancher Mac Brazel had allegedly found a crashed flying saucer on his land. No radio or phone at his house, so he couldn't immediately report it. But he did speak to someone on July 5th, and he told them about this strange thing that had fallen on his land. So At that point, Brazel contacts the sheriff, and the sheriff contacts Roswell Army Airfield, which later became Walker Air Force Base. And it was assigned to Major Jesse Marcel to investigate. So base spokesperson released the statement, which was published by the local paper and then sent to the Associated Press on July the 8th, 1947.
Here's the whole release. The many rumors regarding the flying disc became a reality yesterday when the intelligence office of the 509th Bomb Group of the 8th Air Force Roswell Army Airfield was fortunate enough to gain possession of a disc through the cooperation of one of the local ranchers in the sheriff's office of Shaves County. The flying object landed on a ranch near Roswell sometime last week. Not having phone facilities, the rancher stored the disc until such time as he was able to contact the sheriff's office, who in turn notified Major Jesse A. Marcel of the 509th Bomb Group Intelligence Office.
And so this was the official military report right here. Now, the next events I think are interesting, and they've raised many questions. This is often viewed as the first UFO cover-up by the U.S. government and or military. So on July the 9th, the military recanted the original release and now is saying that the crash debris was just a weather balloon. So Mac Brazel mysteriously changed his story to say that there was no disc or any metallic debris found. And most of the listeners probably have seen the famous picture of Marcel holding up the pieces of balloon. Wow. He later said that he was told by the military to do that and that what he was holding really wasn't what he found. So a lot of controversy around that little photograph.
So is this Roswell story significant?
You know, all the characters in this story now are dead, with the exception of several children of base workers from 1947. And that includes Jesse Marcel Jr., the son of Jesse Marcel. He claims that against all military protocol, that he remembers one night when his dad first brought pieces of the crash craft home to show his wife and son. And the son says that the material was just totally exotic, some kind of strange metal that you could bend and it would pop back into place. And it had symbols like hieroglyphics engraved on the side of it. So we've got lots of peripheral accounts related to this main event. There were witnesses in surrounding areas who also saw a saucer object at the time of the crash. Many people give accounts of collecting debris and recovering bodies at the crash site, bodies of aliens or extraterrestrials, or that's what they assumed anyway. But there is one thing that the Roswell event does show. The government and or military does lie to the public. So before we go any further, let's make sure we're all being accurate here. When we talk about the government and military with regard to UFOs, it gets a little confusing. First, I'm not equating the term military here with all the enlisted personnel and brave, self-sacrificing people doing what they're told. The part of the military dealing with UFOs, or UAPs as they're called now, I believe is what Eisenhower warned about during one of his speeches. It's a group of high-level military leaders and the leaders of some commercial groups who work for the military. And as our listeners probably know, the military now outsources most of its technology, research and development to large corporations like Lockheed Martin and others. Eisenhower called this the military industrial complex, and he noted that this group was getting a little bit too dangerous because it had no accountability to the elected officials in the government.
Wow. And when we hear that the military has spoken, it's usually an elite group of these military industrial leaders, right?
Yeah, and that's important to understand, I think. We tend to think of the military under the umbrella term of government, too. But as Eisenhower and many other elected officials in government have found, the MI elite don't always share their information. They don't even share it with president or Congress sometimes.
Yeah, and we've seen that clearly just in the past few months.
Yeah, we have. Anyway, Roswell was perhaps the first awakening to the fact that the MI elite is probably not a reliable source for UFO data. They made no attempt to say that we made a mistake the first time in calling it a UFO. In fact, they just said, oh, it's just a weather balloon all of a sudden with no explanation. And then several years later, they said, no, it wasn't a weather balloon. It was actually a high altitude spy balloon that was trying to listen to Soviet signals. And that's why the secrecy and the cover up.
But the point is that at least two of those three stories have to be outright deceptions.
Yeah, it would seem.
And we know that the MI elite continually falsifies things. For example, the stealth bomber. The government denied it existed for about 10 years, despite the public sightings of test flights.
And then finally, when it was unveiled, officials just said, yeah, it's our new high-tech plane. You've been seeing this flying around.
So, is it okay for the government or military to lie to the public in order to protect secret technology?
Yeah, sticky question, isn't it? And for the record, I'm a dyed-in-the-wool patriot. I support every letter of the U.S. Constitution. I obey my government because Scripture tells me to. So I would hope that the military government guys that we're talking about have a lot of defense secrets that they're not sharing with the enemies around the world.
Yeah.
I can see that kind of secrecy. I can sort of see why they might benefit from being deceptive and untruthful, but that's another theological quagmire, isn't it?
Yeah, Rahab lied to the enemy soldiers about where Joshua's spies were hiding, and she seemed to
Mm-hmm.
be commended for that in scripture.
Yeah, yeah. But we still have that ninth commandment, don't we? Thou shalt not lie. And I still think there must be a way to accomplish defense goals without just total outright deception. And I
Yeah.
do think there's something wrong when innocent lives are endangered as a result of government deception.
Right. I've heard some speculate that one part of the MI elite may be testing the effectiveness of military by staging fake UFO events.
To me, that would be problematic too. When
Mm.
part of the military goes into red alert for any reason, lives are in danger. It's a dangerous field to be in. And I would hope our military doesn't do things like that. But conspiracy theories do abound on this, and it becomes a big mess of beliefs and trepidations. My rule for considering government, military, MI elite info on UFOs is simply not to consider their info. I have the experiential expectation, though, that based on many documented cases, that their UFO pronouncements aren't usually trustworthy. I tend to place a little more reliability on what they do rather than what they say, although that's not 100% either, obviously.
Hmm. I know that some think the government may be protecting us from the truth about UFOs. If there is undisclosed data, do you think that's okay? Would it cause a public panic if they did disclose
Yeah.
that?
Well, personally, and we'll look at this in a future episode, my gut feeling is that the government and military may be just as clueless as the rest of us on some of this. And remember, the rest of the world is seeing the same phenomena. It doesn't seem to bother humanity in general that we have documented UAPs traveling freely through airspaces and exhibiting technology that's just far superior than anything people on Earth have.
Okay, well, let's circle back to Roswell. Should we forget about that incident?
Well, as interesting and popular as the Roswell case is, it's probably not the best event to study in terms of ongoing data collection, short of a bombshell military confession or the discovery of a really top secret document. The case really is kind of at a stalemate, I think.
But there are many other well-documented, although perhaps lesser-known UFO reports that we can discuss.
Quite a few in that 5% category. So why don't we take a look at some of those? I've selected some to start with that had numerous witnesses who still remember the events. So let's start with this one, the Hillsdale sighting. This is one of my favorites back from 1966.
It is very interesting. So I'm going to read the excerpt from your book about this. On 21st of March, 1966, around 10:30 p.m., 87 girls in the McIntyre dormitory at Hillsdale College, Hillsdale, Michigan, observed a bright silvery white object over the adjoining arboretum. For over 10 minutes, the object displayed pulsating red and green colors, moving from side to side slightly. When the football-shaped light moved closer to the dorm, one of the girls called the Hillsdale Civil Defense Director, Buck Van Horn. In the next minutes, Van Horn and several dorm moms joined the girls in one of the rooms and continued to observe the light. 2 Hillsdale police officers who saw the object from a mile away drove to the campus and documented the event. They also reported that the radio in their car stopped functioning. That's interesting. Eventually, all watched the object split in half, the segments traveling in different directions. The lights were observed until disappearing into the distance. An interesting side note, this event was investigated by Project Blue Book's Dr. J. Allen Hynek. Hynek officially deemed the sighting swamp gas. Those who had witnessed the phenomenon were incensed by the simplistic and obviously contrived analysis. The public outcry eventually resulted in State Representative Gerald R. Ford's call for a congressional hearing on the Air Force's handling of Project Blue Book. The hearing led to a new study of the UFO activity, the Condon Report. This was also a turning point for Dr. Hynek. When eventually free from the alleged coercion of the Air Force, Hynek became a staunch believer in UFO phenomena and founded the Center for UFO Studies, known as CUFOS. What do you see that sets this case apart from all the others?
Well, first, it had multiple witnesses, 87 students, adult dorm mothers, a civil defense officer. And remember, this was the Cold War, so he would know what aerial phenomena looked like. That was what he was trained to watch for. 2 policemen followed the object.
And the object was observed at the dorm for over 10 minutes. It wasn't just a flash of light.
And remember, this was 1966. No drones, no high-tech instruments, no fancy cameras.
And I think it's significant that this event involved J. Allen Hynek, a Project Blue Book fame.
Oh, yeah. A highly educated, no-nonsense astrophysicist who had been studying UFOs for several years now for the Air Force.
And this was the case that eventually led Hynek to become a UFO believer of sorts.
Yeah, when they told him to say it was swamp gas, there was a small pond there in the Arboretum, but most people there said there's no way this could be swamp gas. And we've talked about that before. Swamp gas wouldn't hover around for 10 minutes and then break in half and then quickly speed off over the horizon.
And to be fair, swamp gas, there's no really proved scientific veracity of swamp gas, is there? It's just kind of a theory, right?
Yeah, nobody's ever watched swamp gas float around anywhere.
It's kind of a catch-all for these lights that we see, but there's no proof for that either. It's just...
Yeah, because the average person just thinks, oh, swamp gas, they have it figured out.
So we also have another school-related event in your book, the Westall School account. I'm going to read from your book. On the 6th of April, 1966, over 200 students and teachers in the Melbourne, Australia suburb of Kingston watched an unidentified object for several minutes. A silver metallic disc, said to be a bit larger than an automobile, flew over Westall High School and a crowd of witnesses. During the 20-minute ordeal, the object was close enough for many of the children to later provide consistent descriptions. Others around the Kingston community who were seeing the object converged on the school parking lot. Many, including adults, described the flight behavior as mysterious. One researcher summarizing the interviews with eyewitnesses said the objects flitted from one side of the sky to the other as if it was just blinking off and then on again at spots hundreds of meters away. It ascended and descended and turned at incredible speeds. It was like watching a dragonfly trapped in a bottle, except this dragonfly had no wings. What a great quote. Observers consistently recalled 5 small Cessna-type planes maneuvering around the object. The craft responded to the planes, dodging between and away from them in a cat-and-mouse style. Eventually, the silent craft moved across the school fence and over a row of trees, landing in a nearby field. Against the warnings of teachers, some of the children climbed the fence and approached the site. The students recounted later that the first girl to reach the craft passed out and was taken away by an ambulance. Before others could arrive, the saucer rose quickly and shot away, pursued by the airplanes. Students also reported the crushed, scorched circle of grass where the object had been. One of the most notable features of this incident is the official denial despite such a large number of witnesses. Before the end of the school day, the headmaster had announced an unscheduled school-wide assembly. Students still remember 2 men in suits speaking to them regarding the incident and warning them not to discuss it. One of the teachers had the forethought to grab a camera and snap a roll of pictures through the event. Several documented that the men from the ASIO, Australian Security Intelligence Organization, confiscated her camera. Other adult witnesses later admitted that they were threatened with government action if any contact was made with the media. The official government explanation was a weather balloon, at which the observers still scoff. The only news story to be found at the time was in the local Dandenong Journal. Witnesses claim that officials in brown uniforms examined the area that afternoon and in the days following. Government, military, and police denied any knowledge of the investigations. Records at the nearby airport indicate that no planes were flying over the area that day. In 2011, 50 eyewitnesses to the Westall UFO gathered in Kingston on the event's 45th anniversary. The group was composed of students, teachers, and others still seeking answers. The Kingston City records note, quote, 2 of those present had stood within arm's reach of the flying saucers as they sat on the ground in grassy paddocks adjacent to the schools. 2 others had vivid memories of being called to the headmaster's office and being grilled about what they had witnessed. Others had clear memories of seeing uniformed police officers and soldiers. Wow. This is an incredible sighting. Hundreds of witnesses in over 20 minutes.
And did you notice 1966 again? That was a very good year for flying saucers. That was just right after the Hillsdale event.
Interesting. But this one wasn't a glowing orb. It was reported as a metallic saucer-like object.
And like many current sightings, this object could blink out and then suddenly appear at another location.
And it landed. Some students came within just feet of it. It's so scary. It also left a burned area on the ground. So what's so significant about this case for you?
Like the other one, you have pre-technology. I mean, this was before drones or anything like that. And it actually was when the UFO sighting was not as popular as it is today. Large number of witnesses, students, teachers, townspeople. And when they gathered in 2011 to talk about it, most of them had the same consistent stories as they'd been giving all along.
Wow.
The government's official reaction, if this was the government that was actually talking, was just to refute everything. The conclusion that some say the government came to, or that they spread through the public, that it was just a deflated weather balloon that was blowing across the landscape. So once again, the witnesses look at this and say that there's just no way we would know a weather balloon as opposed to a solid metallic saucer-shaped craft. And it wasn't blowing, it was navigating and, doing what you would think a spacecraft would do. So totally unlike any of the descriptions the witnesses gave if it were a weather balloon.
Yeah. And what else really stood out to me as interesting is there appeared to be what would come to be known as the Men in Black.
Yeah. Those people that hushed everybody, that's what they sounded like. And I'm not sure, nobody reported them as wearing black clothing. So maybe it could have been. Anyway, why would students and others be threatened into silence over a weather balloon coming down? That would be another question.
Good point. So could this have been a cover-up for a top secret aircraft of some sort?
That's going to come up almost with every case. Is our government doing some kind of secret technology? But remember, this was 1966, and the technology that we see today pretty much was the same type of technology we were seeing back then as far as the UFO sightings were. And this was Australia. You don't think of Australia as being the technical development center of the world. And again, this is one reason I like the old cases. The technology, you can look at it and say, well, if it was a government secret, how have they kept the secret that long? My government has trouble just keeping secrets a few days about something. So this is a good one to Google, though. There's lots of good commentaries and videos about this.
Okay, let's move closer to the present. In 1997, there's something called the Phoenix Lights.
This event was well into my adult life, yet I don't remember hearing a thing about this at the time. That sort of shows you how far we've come since the 90s. This was pre-internet and smartphone and social media.
Yeah, literally hundreds of witnesses across an entire state. Can you imagine if this same event took place today?
And as a side note to address later, why don't we have events like this happening nowadays since people do have phones and cameras and stuff like that?
Oh, wow. That's a good question. It seems as though the event was meant to be seen, but not really documented.
Kind of flirtatious.
A lot of ufologists have come to the same conclusion. Okay, here's another excerpt from your book regarding what has come to be called the Phoenix Lights. The Phoenix incident involved thousands of witnesses over a 300-mile flight path. At about 8 p.m., 13th of March, 1997, a large triangular object was reported hovering over Henderson, Nevada. Reports mentioned 5 to 10 large lights on the leading edge of the object. Minutes later, as it entered Phoenix airspace, numerous reports were relayed to the authorities. Most witnesses saw only the lights in the same triangular configuration without the solid shape. The wingspan of the object based on the light array was estimated to be at least a kilometer. Over 2 to 3 hours, the object flew near Tucson and eventually Sonora, Mexico. The phenomena was well documented with photos and video. It remains a complicated case due to the tremendous number of witnesses and government personnel involved. Several official explanations have been offered, from flares to plane formations. All have been strongly disputed by the witnesses. With thousands of observers, there is no shortage of data. A large number of these witnesses were interviewed and can be found on many different videos. The descriptions seem remarkably similar. Most deviations can be attributed to distance and other viewing factors.
Yeah, and for brevity, I've pulled together just a few representative comments about the Phoenix lights from these thousands of witnesses, just to give a feel for what people were seeing at that time.
Okay, good. Yeah.
So 5 lights passing overhead at a very slow rate. Too slow to stay in the air if it was an aircraft. V formation of 5 lights with 2 lights trailing. 2 lights docking and undocking from the other 5.
Wow.
So big we couldn't see both edges of it. I would gauge the object to be several football fields.
Wow.
A mile across, maybe, another witness says. Like we could actually reach up and touch it. It was so low, but still no sound. It was so low, all we could see was the left wing. Quite obvious it was no conventional aircraft. Soft glow, bright, but no glare. Orangish amber lights, so lustrous it was almost like the object seemed to be made out of light. So a boomerang-shaped craft. These are very common, by the way, in UFO reports today, and in the past also. They're typically triangular, boomerang shape, chevron shape, something like that. Almost always black with some kind of exterior lighting showing. And this might also include the groups of lights that are flying in triangular formations, because sometimes you can't really tell what the actual body of the craft looks like. You may not see it, but you can still see a formation, like a V-shaped formation of lights in the sky.
Yeah, and this is very similar to the Hudson Valley lights from
just a little before.
1983 to 1986, and the Belgium UFO wave from 1989 to 1990, also observed by many. Did the military or government give any explanation for the Phoenix lights?
Best they could offer was that people were seeing flares drop during an Air Force training exercise or something.
Is that a good possibility?
Well, the witnesses came back with a unanimous, resounding, and very indignant no.
And from the comments you shared, this doesn't fit at all with the observations, like flares.
Not even close. Witnesses saw an object over their houses, and that's where they observed it. It wasn't something like a flare.
And would the military, it wouldn't drop flares over a residential area in a 300-mile swath, right?
Well, I would hope not. And yeah, they do have a restriction on that. So the obvious question here then, does the U.S. or another country or corporation or something, do they have a high-tech triangular craft that fits these sightings? And as we mentioned, the stealth bomber, the B-2 Spirit, is very similar in shape to some of these triangular craft that were being reported and have been reported. And we know that in the 80s, some people did observe the B-2 Spirit and reported it as a UFO.
Yeah, but the size is incredible to me. I mean, where would they store a craft like that? But
yeah, that is problematic.
And some of these triangular boomerang UFOs could possibly be new B-2 types that are being tested, right?
That's true. I think that some people may be seeing some kind of new craft that we have out there. The TRB-3 is one. It's kind of a mysterious craft that some people think might be in the make somewhere. It has a lot of conspiracy theories about it. But I think we may have cases where we have both of these things. And the difference being, some reports have the objects traveling just like a conventional aircraft. And I wouldn't be surprised if that were true. Those would be the ones that are actually government secret craft that they're working on. But then, as with the Phoenix lights, many of these reported objects don't move conventionally. They move very slowly, even hovering stationary, and they can speed up when they want to and go very rapidly. And that's just not something that you would associate with a blimp or some kind of balloon.
Yeah. What about sound?
Yeah, and the sound things. We have some very quiet airplanes, and people talk about the idea we may have sound canceling technology, but so far, that's not a thing. I mean, it hasn't been shown to be something that's real in the government or even possible scientifically to do something like that.
So theoretically, like, we would expect to hear sound if these were government vehicles or in the sky.
You would think so.
And also there's the size issue, which I just brought up. A lot of witnesses report triangles the size of a football field or a city block.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
Yeah, a floating triangle the size of a city block. So, and the next question is, if the military had something like that, it seems like it would have to be something like a blimp or dirigible that would account for the slow hovering actions, but not the lack of sound and the fast maneuvering when it wanted to. And
well, and then there's the question that, like, I have a difficulty with the practicality of a craft like this.
yeah, why would the military, why would they want to build something like this? A huge, sluggish, low-flying, vulnerable balloon, basically. Also, what's wrong with this scenario? You're testing a secret technology, but you do it over a highly populated area.
That's a good point. And it also does seem to be teasing, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Do they want us to see it or not? Why fly it in our faces and then deny it?
Yeah, exactly. So is this some kind of psyop that the government is doing on us? They want to see how people react to something weird like a UAP or to draw our attention maybe away from more substantial things that are going on politically, perhaps. And if this is U.S. military technology, why are they violating the airspace of so many other countries? Because we've got numerous cases like in Belgium and Mexico of this same craft flying around. So does every country have this technology, or are we violating their airspace in some way?
I don't think any of this fits the data we have on the Phoenix Lights or any of the other triangles.
No, it doesn't seem to. And finally, this same type of UFO has been observed for at least 70 years. So once again, could this kind of technology be kept secret that long? Wouldn't somebody be a whistleblower at some point in this whole process?
And if it's a technology designed to give a military advantage, we certainly haven't seen any result of that.
No, it's just not feasible, I don't think. And that goes for a lot of other UFO types.
So let's look at one more incident, much more recently in 2004.
Yeah, the Nimitz encounter, November of 2004. This involved what was called the USS Nimitz Carrier Strike Group. So it was a group of vessels and the missile cruiser, the USS Princeton. So it was a big deal. And it was right before the Persian Gulf deployment. So they were on maneuvers about 100 miles southwest of San Diego during this.
Okay, here's the excerpt from your book. At mid-afternoon, two FA-18F Super Hornet fighter jets from the Nimitz were ordered to stop maneuvers and proceed to new coordinates. It was later acknowledged that the Princeton had been tracking anomalous aerial vehicles in the area for the past several days. The Princeton senior radar operator Kevin Day admitted that radar detected over 100 AAVs in the week leading up to the event. He claims that the radar images at times were like watching snow fall from the sky. Initially, the radar team suspected electronic glitches. All systems were tested and approved. The objects first appeared at 80,000 feet, which is well above typical air traffic, then dropped very quickly to the ocean surface. When the diverted jets reached the site, the lead pilot reported a disturbance in the water with waves crashing over what appeared to be a large object just under the surface. Around the same time, sonar operators reported a submerged object moving at twice the speed of a submarine capabilities. Within seconds, another object appeared about 50 feet over the water. It was described as a white 40-foot oval shaped like a Tic Tac candy. There were no visible wings or rotors.
And here's a report from one of the pursuing pilots that kind of puts it in perspective. He's describing the object's unusual flight characteristics. Quote, "And what I mean by erratic is that it changes in altitude, airspeeds, and aspect were just unlike things that I've ever encountered before flying against other air targets. It was just behaving in ways that aren't physically normal. Aircraft, whether they're manned or unmanned, still have to obey the laws of physics. The Tic Tac was not doing that." End quote. Yeah, this case has everything, doesn't it?
Oh, man. Yes. A visible, non-conventional craft, multiple witnesses and data points, dual medium craft, able to navigate air and water, breaking physical laws, and MI elite confirmation.
Yeah.
Is that fact alone evidence of deception? Is the MI elite doing some kind of psyop here?
That's one conspiracy theory. You just don't know. I mean, it doesn't seem that way. And I would hope our government wouldn't endanger not just the soldiers and sailors and pilots who are doing this, but innocent people on land that would be close to this. And you see, that's the problem with government military admissions. If they deny a report, everyone cries deception. But if they disclose anything, we do the same. That's why I think we should just ignore what they say and just watch what they do.
And the technology we see in these tic-tac craft is extremely high tech, isn't it?
At least, I think there's something significant going on. A history of UFO activity in the area, multiple observations again by frontline sailors and pilots, visually and on radar and FLIR, forward-looking infrared. And that would just be difficult for the MI elite to choreograph, I think.
And the technology we see in these tic-tac craft is extremely high tech, isn't it?
Yeah, and not just a decade or so in the future beyond what we consider conventional. It is far in the future as far as what these things can do, because like we've said before, you can't have things defy the laws of physics like these things seem to be doing.
Do you think there's any credibility in reverse engineering claims?
Yeah, that idea has been batted around since the Roswell case. Has the military been recovering these crashed extraterrestrial UFOs? And are they what they call reverse engineering, or trying to copy that technology into man-made or human-made craft of some sort?
Yeah, some claim that this explains the secrecy. The military-industrial complex actually manufactures craft with advanced alien technology, like anti-gravity and the ability to slip through time-space wormholes.
Yeah, there that is again. And with that belief, some UFOs could be extraterrestrials and some could be ours. I tend to believe, though, that if the U.S. or some other entity had this high tech, someone would be ruling the world by now.
Yeah.
I don't think any human powers could sit on something like this for, 70 or so years.
But I mean, the point is, whatever is going on, the Nimitz case brought another landmark to ufology.
Yeah, the Nimitz events are a big factor in the current push by the military and some government officials to address the possible security risk that something is providing to us right now. Many elected leaders, such as Harry Reid, they've noted that these vehicles can move at hyperspeeds, appear and vanish in our airspace, fly without exterior mechanisms like wings, and they outmaneuver every single bit of good technology that we've got. And so he says, along with others, this deserves more government or military attention than it's getting right now.
And Reid was instrumental in the formation of the Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program, which secretly investigated UAPs from 2007 to 2012. Currently, they say they'll continue to investigate through normal procedures reports of unidentified aircraft encountered by military pilots to ensure homeland defense and the caveat phrase to protect against strategic surprise by our nation's adversaries.
Yeah.
This is getting good, isn't it?
And we've only scratched the surface of reported UFO events.
And to reemphasize what we said earlier, right now we're simply relating the accounts, the data on what people are seeing and reporting.
And I think these sample accounts we've discussed today effectively eliminate at least one of those four explanations that we gave for UFO phenomena, and that's that all UFO sightings are mistaken identities or hoaxes. Yeah. That doesn't seem to be a viable option anymore. And now that's also the working strategy for the U.S. government and military, finally.
And I tend to think that some may be new, top secret, man-made technology, but by no means most of them.
No.
So we still have two other possible explanations that are gaining traction in the culture. UFO phenomena are caused by extraterrestrials or by paranormal supernatural entities.
Mm-hmm. And we believe Scripture has good, relevant answers for these options, as well as other issues we've raised.
Right. So listeners, please keep listening. We'll examine these completely in future episodes.
We promise.
We're so glad you joined us. If you would like to comment or ask questions, please send us an email at godandtheparanormal@gmail.com. You can also get more information at our website, thinkingaboutthebible.com. And on whatever platform you're listening, please subscribe, hit like, give us a thumbs up, add a comment, let us know you're there. It really helps us. Goodbye for now.